Alright, almost done. Unit 5, Video 13, Civil Liberties, Civil Rights, so discrimination cases. Alright, we got Dred Scott versus Sanford. Says that persons of African ancestry can never attain citizenship. This is overturned by the 14th Amendment. This is widely considered one of, if not the very worst, Supreme Court decision in American history. Another pretty bad one was Plessy versus Ferguson, that allowed separate but equal. So Plessy versus Ferguson said that that was okay to have segregation, and they based it on separate but equal. Brown versus Board is going to overturn the separate but equal principle, and it is going to end segregation in public schools. So it takes till 1954. Good example of a Supreme Court case overturning a previous decision. Brown versus Board of Education, the sequel, part 2, 1 year later, 1955, because nobody actually did anything when the Supreme Court told them to desegregate. They then had another decision that said that they have to desegregate with all deliberate speed. They didn't really listen to that either. A good example of how the Supreme Court lacks ability to enforce their own decisions. Another awful decision by the U.S. Supreme Court here is Korematsu versus the United States. And it allowed Japanese internment camps to be used. Not much defending that decision. They did rule this unconstitutional a few years later after the war was over, but by that point it didn't matter. So, again, just a terrible decision by the Supreme Court. Alright, we have here the Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States. What happens here is that the Civil Rights Act got passed, and the very day that it got passed, this Supreme Court case was begun. They sued because the owner of this motel had forever discriminated and had only allowed white guests to stay at his hotel, and he wanted to keep doing it that way. He did not want to have to allow black people to stay at his hotel, and so he claimed that this violated, that law was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court disagrees. They heard this case very quickly because of how important it was, and they ruled to uphold the Civil Rights Act. And what is important and what you absolutely positively need to know, so you need to highlight it and circle it. You don't need to know the name of this case, but you need to know why the Civil Rights Act was ruled constitutional. And the answer to that is because of the Commerce Clause. So because Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce, they said that they were allowed to make that law. This is a very broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause, because remember, Congress can only do interstate, and what they ruled was essentially if any of your guests come from another state, if any of the things in your establishment, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a motel, whether it's something else, comes from another state, if anything about it has ever crossed state lines, essentially, it is interstate commerce, and therefore Congress can regulate it. So they can tell a motel that they cannot be racist anymore. Well, they can't discriminate anyway. Katzenbach versus McClung is the exact same type of case as Heart of Atlanta. The difference is that this was for a restaurant. It was called Ollie's Barbecue, and he wanted to still be able to discriminate. They told him he couldn't either, and the reason for that was because some of the things in his restaurant came from another state. They had traveled across state lines, therefore he was also involved in interstate commerce. And this has been a Lamani production.